Kalimera, Melenne Maaret Pyhäjärvi, ke ime apo Stin Finlandia. I actually know a little bit of Greece, and it's a great honor to be here, because 25 years, this country and this language is the reason why I became a tester. I was studying the Greek language back in, sixth grade, before university, because I had been coming to Greece for holidays so many times, and I couldn't stand the idea that people could talk next to me so that I don't understand them. So I started studying so that you can't actually speak next to me so that I can't understand you, but I can't say as much as I can listen. So unfortunately, that's the case. I became a tester 25 years ago, and that's kind of the journey that I'm still on. Recently, my title has been manager, engineering manager, senior manager. I use these two titles. And pretty much I think of it as the only difference between me as a manager and me as a tester is that I have to press stupidly, ignorantly an approve button many times a week. I never had to do stupid clicking while I was a tester. That's what managers in my company need to do. So someone needs to approve hours and someone needs to approve all kinds of invoices. So that's what I got as an addition to being a manager. But today, we're going to be talking about breaking illusions with testing. And this is kind of a journey that I've been on all these 25 years. But we're starting with a story that happened a few years ago. So a few years ago, I wanted to go to a conference, and I wanted to show people that exploratory testing is something more than just, playing with user interfaces and complaining about usability problems. That we actually pay attention to something really relevant, we're looking for real risks, and that we don't even need a user interface to do that. And I thought the best way to show that is to take an application that I could test that doesn't have a user interface. So I reached out to a friend of mine, and they gave me their open source project and said, yeah, sure, play with this, I don't mind. You can test this. But also, they said things like, when I was asking to explore it, they said, yeah, sure, go for it. You're not going to find anything anyway. I've created the whole project with TDD, all the great Agile practices. I pair with other people online to write every single line of code. So, there's not going to be any problems to find. And then they went on a podcast from which this quote is from, having to say, I destroyed it in like an hour and a half. To be fair, it actually took me more like 3 hours, and I did quite many things in those 3 hours, and all of them focused on learning. So let's look a little bit more of what I do. So the first thing of what I needed to teach this person is that, I don't actually break your code. I didn't break it in an hour and a half. It was already broken. You just thought it wasn't. So the only thing that got broken was their illusion that it was ever as good. So regardless of all the pair programming, regardless of all the unit testing in TDD style, there were still plenty of things for me to find. And kind of looking at that, why I can do this is that over the years I've grown to look at illusions from many, many different perspectives. So 25 years ago, I could see some kind of illusions, basically works, doesn't work. Then growing over the years into seeing a little bit more. And now, after 25 years, I don't just stop at the usual illusions. So we'll look at some of that more. So the illusions that I'm going to introduce to you are kind of these 6 ones. The first of 3 are basic illusions. The basic illusions are things around the code doing whatever it was supposed to do, or the product doing what it actually needs to do, so user needs also, and only doing what it's supposed to do, usually related to security. We're looking at these in a bit more detail. But we're also going to be looking at the things that kind of like over the growth of my career, I started realizing that my kind, testers, could also contribute a lot more on if we didn't so narrow-mindedly just look at problems around the software. We could also be looking at problems around the way we work. So we could look at processes, Agile in particular, noticing that things are not delivering quite as well as we hoped they would, that people would, have all the necessary skills. There's many different ways of doing testing. It's not all the same, so we're going to look at that a little bit more. And then business models, understanding how the money flows in. It's kind of a critical thing, and thinking critically, breaking all the illusions around that might be a thing that you really want to get to do. So we're digging into how. And we're using approval tests, the project that I did a few years ago, or was testing a few years ago, as an example. So what I do to break those illusions is basically that I spend time with the application. So I need to set it up on my machine, and since I'm setting it up on my machine, I need to ask all kinds of questions about what does it depend on, what does it need. I might be reading some documentation around it. And since I'm limited with time, usually 2-3 hours is what I get started with, I probably can't do all of it. So I'm making heavy prioritization calls all the time with the idea that right now, as I'm getting started, I know the least, but in an hour, I know a lot more than I do now. And in 2 hours, a lot more than I used to know 1 hour before. So approaching it as a learning exercise is what I do. I look at the product as if it was my external imagination. Sometimes when I tell this to people, I feel like I'm crazy, because software speaks to me. So really, seriously, when I have my hands on that keyboard with that software that we built or someone built, it tells me what to do. I see a field here somewhere, and I have tons of ideas on what I can put in that field. And it whispers me, like, you should try special characters. You're in Greece today. Be inspired, put some Greek letters. All kinds of things. So my imagination really fires up when I have that software at my hands. But also, what I need to do when I look at it as my external imagination is also reminding me that I need to be anchored with my imagination into actually starting to do something. If I only imagine and I don't do anything, it doesn't give me anything more. So I need to use it as an anchor and imagination. So the way I do this is, first of all, I use heuristics. They are kind of these rules of thumb, like how to approach it. My main rule is, in testing, in 25 years, is never ever be bored. I've been bored more often as a manager with the approve button than I have ever been as a tester. If you are bored when you're testing, you're probably doing something wrong. And what you're doing usually wrong is that you're not thinking of all the possibilities and options of what you could be doing right now, and all the possibilities and options of what might be wrong with that software right now, if you just allowed it to tell it to you by having hands on the keyboard, letting it be your external imagination. My second heuristic that I use is to remember that whenever I start, that's when I know the least. That's when I do not want to write documentation. Like if I start writing a lot of documentation from the moment when I start, most likely 3 hours later I want to throw all of that out, because I've learned that things are not quite the way I thought they were with my background. So I write some kind of notes to help me see where I'm changing my mind, but I do not write test cases, and I don't write test cases as automation right away when I start. That comes later, usually in my process of exploring. So yes, exploratory testing and automation are the same things. Automation is just a form of documenting things. And the third heuristic that I find that is really useful is kind of, just staying with things for a while. So touching things until you find something interesting, change a little bit from a different direction. That usually brings you good results. So these kind of things and all the different heuristics that the testing field usually talks about are kind of like, I've collected a lot of these over 25 years. I can't tell you all of them today, but this heuristic table of testing is kind of a nice way of kind of fast-tracking into some of the tester wisdom on how do we always get the software to break, even though it was supposed to work. We were sure it would work. And then yet there's these people who always find something more. The main heuristic out of this table that I used to test approval tests was one called SFDPO. It basically tells me to think about things in 6 different dimensions. And some of the dimensions that were particularly important were the platforms idea and the data idea. And with the platforms idea, what I did is I set up an environment that had 2 dependencies that software was supposed to have, usually one at a time. It wasn't forbidden to have 2 of them, only to find out that I couldn't even get started with testing in that environment if I had 2 unit testing frameworks on a single computer, which should be a normal thing to have, but unfortunately it was a scenario that the developer completely forgot. I played a lot with data to find out that from an American's perspective, the things we consider normal in Finland as characters might not be so well handled. I played a lot with different functionalities, just basically listing out all kinds of things that they were, learned where the unit tests were, how to run them, and actually figured out that they were checked in last time in a broken state, which was also, a problem to find from that project. So these kind of checklists, I usually don't have them on paper or as any visible tool, but they are things that I've internalized quite well by practicing them, by doing testing, thinking in different dimensions. I'm just going to click that one. So I also then, when I had spent my first hour, I found that I had already listed a couple of problems. The fact that it didn't start at all, it took the developer about 5 minutes to fix that. So it was a really easy fix, but you needed to know to get to that. So I had a new project delivered, new version delivered, so we were collaborating quite keenly. I had already complained about the fact that his documentation was pretty 80s, in the sense that it was screenshots as images. Who in these days, with the usual tools, who in these days anymore wouldn't have copy-pastable examples? Like if you're working with code, it has to be copy-pastable, obviously. And a couple of other problems. But I was ready to get to the point of actually asking something a little more relevant than the easy problems that I might run into, almost by accident, giving it the chance of revealing itself. So I asked the developer what kind of things I should pay attention to, and I made notes. And they told me that this is the things that approvers do. You don't really need to read all of this list. But I got almost an equal long list on what the reporters, approvers and reporters parts do. So I basically learned about functions. And I had this idea that, okay, if I really wanted to test this software, it's going to take me a little longer than 3 hours. So finding out all of these, and by the way, the project, I think it's in about 10 languages nowadays. So these claims over 10 different languages because people expect consistency across different languages and language ecosystems. There's going to be more work than what I can do in a short session. I also drew kind of like a picture of what kind of an operational environment would that software have. So the thing there in the middle is the thing I was testing, and all the things around it are things that it depends on and will be some kind of factors into me playing with the software with the intention of breaking it in some way or actually breaking some illusions about it in some way. And I, of course, also made notes, even though I don't make test cases in the beginning. I make notes of what I'm testing, what I'm learning, so that I notice when I change my mind completely later on. And this is quite normal way for an exploratory tester to approach a new thing. So what I ended up with is basically these different kinds of illusions. I learned a lot that this code wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. But in particular, I found many problems around the idea that it didn't do what I, as the user, needed it to do. It didn't work on my environment out of the box. It didn't give me good enough guidance. And it was really, really difficult to discover where the API even was and how to use it in ways that are usually normal rules for using something within an IDE. So again, it wasn't built particularly well, but it wasn't actually something that they had even thought about, because TDD doesn't really bite or catch these kind of problems where the expectation of what you're building against wasn't yet quite good enough in the first case. I didn't really find any problems related to it only doing what it's supposed to do. I wasn't particularly focused on the security-related aspects, but there's many examples where we get to do things that, if we think about it a little bit, might not be so welcome. Maybe my favorite examples around this are things around which people get flooded with all kinds of messages in online tools when someone else decides that that's something they want to cause them. So thinking in the negative scenarios, as in you're being targeted in some way, security-related stuff, might also be a very relevant thing to do. But all of this stuff that I do regularly with testing, I don't think that's the most interesting. That's actually, I think it is the most interesting thing I've ever done in my whole career, but it's only been the interesting foundation to realize that there's all kinds of illusions. So I really want to spend a little bit time in explaining some of the other illusions to you as well. I have some examples that I've collected, and I find that this way of thinking around things and thinking around illusions, it's been really helpful for me as an Agile practitioner, going in and changing things that people say that they cannot be changed. Like, I have a long list of things where I have completely changed my mind, starting from continuous integration. I thought that it was insane, but that was 20 years ago when I thought it was insane. Right now, I can't even imagine why I would ever think that way. To test cases that I was teaching at a university, that this is how we write them. And there's no money that you could pay me to write that kind of test cases that I used to teach people how to write. So again, there's many illusions where you need to break things in yourself, you need to break things in your organization, and you need to notice that you want things to be different. Things should be different, and you can actively go for those. And I find that this idea of testing as breaking for illusions has helped me in this a lot. So my first illusion on this category is really the business-related aspects of driving whatever we're doing into the right kind of focus. So I right now work with a team that has no product owner. We get back to it a little bit. Basically with the idea that having a product owner means we're allocating our most important problem to one person and one brains. And it's our most important problem, so we should all be thinking about it. So we're all product owners, basically. 12-people team, no product owner. And this helps us focus on what the customers really want without removing the broken translation layer that is usually a risk in many of the product companies. Meeting real customers and figuring out what is it that they're actually willing to pay for. My favorite example of things around business-related things that I have had to break is in my previous place of work. I ended up with a customer who suggested that they would buy a new feature from us if we could develop it in, I think it was about 6 months. If we can have it available in 6 months, they would pay for us. And I went to the business and said, like, this sounds like a really good opportunity. The developers, the rest of the team, they were saying that it's going to take us a year, maybe 2 years to develop this. And I went and said, sounds like a good thing, but let's first get a contract, 10% in advance. And what we learned with that little test case is that the customer thought it would be something they can have for the same price. So we were completely on different sides of thinking about things. But the main example on this business category that I find myself regularly breaking with different organizations is this idea of delivering continuously. So a lot of times we still keep on thinking that if we do these bigger things, we do the whole feature, the whole idea, the whole thing, and don't show anything to the user before it's all ready and you know, the big impact is available. That's not the best way to handle risk, especially in software projects, but that the smaller cartons, the smaller deliveries in Agile, in software projects, they actually make things a lot less risky and a lot cheaper. So this has meant that in my previous place of work, we ended up with daily continuous delivery to production every day without any automation. We had no automation, and yet we were releasing daily. It was safer than the other way around. In my current place of work, I wouldn't dare to go quite as far. We are not doing anymore a web-based thing where it's just one computer that needs to be updated. Right now, whenever we're updating, it's a few million computers that we have absolutely no control over, that are somewhere around the world at different companies. And delivering small things helps you if anything goes wrong, when you can see that through telemetry. It helps you know exactly what was the change in that small delivery that might have caused these new symptoms that we're seeing. It allows you to go back really quickly to whatever was the previous stable situation, but it also gives you a chance of really digging in and in 5 minutes fixing the problem, because you don't have to be juggling what the problem is out of thousands of options. So continuous delivery is kind of my favorite way of breaking illusions. The other category of breaking illusions is around people, and I have been very fortunate for many, many years to work with absolutely lovely and wonderful people. I would call them even competent in many, many ways. So they know how to do their work, they know how to collaborate, they know how to work together in really, really nice ways. But it doesn't still mean that there wouldn't be some illusions that we need to kind of pay attention to. And this is maybe the most difficult example that I have here. And I had to to deal with these kind of things, I needed to take my team to an escape room to make a problem visible. So let me go back a little bit. So I had this feeling at my work that while we were doing things in an agile way and quite nicely and everyone contributing, like I had to repeat things a lot. Like I felt like whenever I would say something, I would need to say it again, I would need to say it personally to someone, and I was putting a lot of effort actually in making sure different people knew whatever messages I was trying to take forward. And it almost like became a thing that I always was doing. It's actually one of the reasons probably why I'm winning so many of the things, that I have been, learning these skills of building that kind of community sense, moving my ideas to other people because they get accepted easier through other people. But I was really, really puzzled on with my own team. Like I say, we should test this. And they're like, no, it's like, we're going forward. Like, we should test this. Like, no, we're going. Like, we don't need to. Like, they don't even necessarily acknowledge always, or didn't acknowledge always what I was saying. So I took them to an escape room. One thing I didn't tell them about that escape room is that I had been there before. I had all the keys. I had all the answers, and none of them knew that. So I started testing my theory. Tester, illusions, maybe the illusion was me. We were locked in these different, I was in a cell with 2 different colleagues. One person was in shackles, and 2 people were in these isolated booths. And we needed to get out of there. We needed to talk to each other so that we could get out of there. And I would, of course, step back and not give people the answers and just watch the dynamic flow. And we were really not getting anywhere. So then I started giving hints on hey, maybe we could, try that. Maybe we could try that. Nobody paid any attention to what I was saying. And again, these are nice people, and I didn't really strongly feel like I wasn't listened to. We got to other rooms, and I particularly remember this one place where, as part of the escape room, you have to climb on a table, hands up, straight X on a table, and you have to scream your lungs out. Otherwise, you can't get forward. And I tried 10 different ways of giving people hints that we would need to do that. And everyone, even when they started listening to me, they insisted I must just be wrong. Eventually, I climbed on that table and screamed my lungs out. And we got forward. Half an hour later, fast forward, and we had a retrospective of how did this go. And I was thinking, I'm going to tell my team now. And I had quite many of the gentlemen in the team kind of patting themselves on the back, saying, "Good job, we are so smart. We figured out all the answers." And when I was trying to facilitate out, "Did you notice me doing anything special?" No, it was just us. So again, sometimes the illusions that you need to break are so subtle that they are in the patterns of how you treat particular people in the team. And the funny part about this is the day my team made me the manager because our boss decided there needs to be a team manager, this whole thing changed around. Now when I say, "Should we test this?" they say, "Yes, boss, would you like 10 test cases?" And they are not people that I would regularly think that they do this intentionally. It's just very fine-grained, and unless we talk about these kind of things in our projects, there's no way we're going to change the status of how things go. So this is related to the fact that we still consider testers in teams a lower status. So if there's nothing else you do differently, pay attention to who you are not listening to and give them a little bit of extra ear based on this one. But my team and I, we're still in good terms, even after I have told them that I did this to them, and even after I have told this story to some thousands of people around the world. So again, all of this is in the spirit of going forward and learning to be better people, better testers, better software developers, better teammates to one another. Then the illusion type 4, the process. Again, probably nowadays one of my favorite ones, the idea that when we take whatever process it is, it might be Scrum, it might be Kanban, it might be the Spotify model, whatever of the processes that work around or go around in the field of Agile, that it actually is able to do the things for us that we expect it to do. So for me, figuring out process-related stuff has really become something that I really, really enjoy. And my first example on this is from a few years ago, when, I had a chance of listening to this one fellow named Woody Zuiel in a conference, and he told about this idea of working on a single computer, whole group of people, like a team of 8 people, one computer. You have to use your words to get anything to happen on that keyboard. And that's how you would work 8 hours a day, every day, for years. I thought that was ridiculous. It was probably the most ridiculous thing I can still think of hearing. I remember the feeling very vividly. And I thought that, hey, I felt this way before. I felt this way with some of the things that are now kind of core of the way I do things and how I succeed in things in projects. And I thought, I hate this idea, but I have to try it. So I went to office and I told my colleagues that I wanted to try a thing called mob programming. And I explained it that it is, group working, using words, not thinking at the keyboard, all that kind of things. And they told me no, absolutely. That was my previous team before the current one. And I tried again, and again, and again. And eventually I realized that the best way to get through to that particular team was to say, I'm so lonely. I'm the only tester. Wouldn't you, do something for me? I wasn't crying, but I was kind of saying, really seriously, we are remote most of the time. I'm already working as the only tester in this group of 15 developers. And I'm asking you this one thing, just humor me for once. So we got together, we had a facilitator available for us, and we cleaned up some code for a few hours. It was like a party, and we did it again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And over that time of doing it, I completely rewrote my history of, I'm not a programmer, I don't actually even like programming, to, yeah, sure, I can do test automation, I can clean up code with the rest of the group. And in fact, I started programming when I was, I think, 13 or 14, and it's been 14 languages that I have written code in. So cognitive dissonance, finding yourself doing something you think you don't want to do, it's magical in the way that it can rewrite your history. So there was a big illusion in me that needed to be replaced, but we learned so much over those sessions. We never did it 8 hours a day like Woody Zuil and his teams do, but we did it every 2 weeks for 2 hours. We changed projects that were supposed to take 6 months into something that was delivered in 2 weeks by first mobbing 2 hours there and just realizing how much things we already had there. And frankly, I've never known how to ask people to teach me things I don't know. I don't think we have that skill. If we knew it, we would ask for it. But if we don't, how are we asking for something we don't know that we need? And in a mob, what I find is the most powerful thing is that I can see the way other people are doing things, solving problems, and I can ask, what's that thing you just did? Can you do it slower? Can you explain it while you're doing it? I've learned tools that I never knew that existed, because I couldn't ask for those tools, because I didn't know they could exist. People didn't know I needed them, so that was a big change. Then there was some other things that I needed to really list here. Mobbing is really my favorite thing in this category of breaking illusions about process, that it can be effective, it can be really powerful through the learning and the focus it gives. But there's a long list of things that we do. I know that the doing doesn't really come across with the no list, but we do continuous delivery. We don't do Jira. We rather talk. We avoid Jira if we can. If we have to talk to other teams, then we use Jira for sending a message across to Kuala Lumpur. That's kind of difficult, otherwise it's always better than an email. But within the team, if we can sit together, figure it out, agree on what we do right now in this moment, we'd rather not use Jira. It doesn't need a piece of documentation. We don't need to prove that. We don't do estimates. Well, you don't usually need estimates when whatever you're delivering happens in small pieces of a few days. And you can then start looking at what you already have, and it creates a kind of trust. And also, not spending time on playing poker or whatever the agile ways of doing this are, it frees us to deliver some more with that time. Because we don't spend time on the ceremony, we just take the core. The core is asking, how can we make this smaller? We are not doing big things, we want to figure out how to make things smaller. We don't have a product owner, this I already mentioned. It started as an experiment of making sure, we all feel empowered. we delivered 4 times more in the 3 months time frame, comparing two different 3-month time frames before that with the product owner, because we didn't need to wait and we didn't need to translate broken requirements. We went right to the source, and in the beginning most of the source was actually salespeople in the organization, and they could help us find just the right customer who were saying that something needed doing. So we figured out better ways of building features, like the feature as we read the description would have been something completely different than what actually we delivered, and that helped solve the problem. So we have no product owner, we have no projects. So I was just yesterday commenting this over dinner, and like people are talking about projects, and I haven't seen one for a few years now. So continuous delivering, you don't really set up a project. You have like themes in some way that you may be following, that you're done with something, but that's not a project in the same way. And we don't do Scrum. So if what we do resembles something, it resembles Kanban a lot more. So the flow idea of getting things through and not leaving things in queues waiting for someone. So we all go and swarm together to make the thing go all the way through to production. So that's kind of the process-related stuff that I find myself breaking illusions on. But the big thing that still keeps coming back to me from all of this is that the reason why I keep breaking illusions, why we look at that kind of things, is that testing has always been about learning. Agile is, at its core, about learning. Introspection, reflection, not just looking at the problems we recognize we have right now, but also the systemic problems that somehow take away from the possibility that we could be better than we are right now. So the systemic problems, that's a whole different level of illusions that we need to focus on. But learning, I think of it as a superpower. It's really the core of exploring. And the first type of illusion around learning, I feel, is this idea that some people are seniors, some people are not seniors, and that it somehow would mean that the seniors wouldn't have anything to learn from the juniors. And in fact, I know this from a very personal experience, is that even the 15-year-old person who joined my team 2 years ago could, on a daily basis, teach me things if I would just keep my mind open to paying attention to what kind of things were they trying to figure out, with what kind of life experience that I didn't have, and appreciate that. So even if there is still very much in the field of testing the fact that I know more than they did, there was still much more that I could learn from them and with them. So learning isn't linear. As testers, we really like looking at things from perspectives, so I can definitely recommend this kind of a practice. I like the picture a lot where you look at it from one angle, and I even, there's the text there saying, from here it's trying to resemble a cat, from here it's trying to be a bird. But I could also, look at this picture and think of like, is there a particular reason why the paper is yellow? Like, was it old paper? Is that somehow intentional? Is it accidental? Does it mean something? The lines, it's clearly been chosen that the lines are, well, I don't know if it's chosen or not, but the lines are not very equal. So the pen choice, it might mean something. It might mean that it wasn't completely thought of, or it's really, really intentional. And some of the lines, they actually don't quite close. So maybe that is also something to pay attention to. And there's all kinds of geometric shapes here. So maybe it wasn't even intended as a bird or a cat. Maybe it's just triangles and round shapes and ellipses with some anomalies in the group. So depending on what the perspective is that you look at things, you will see things differently. And I find that this is a superpower to have in the teams, that someone would be pointing out that the icon that we use in our as our avatar in our program, that the 12-year-old girl doesn't have to be the first person who says that. It doesn't look like me. And actually people who look like me, half of the nation, so maybe it could be a little bit more inclusive in that sense. So for learning, I suggest all kinds of actions. I like playing games, so I took as a final example here a little game that we played one afternoon at office for testing purposes. This is called Boggle. Boggle is it's a word game. And the idea is that you get 5 letters, and, well, it's kind of like Scrabble. You put things in different order, and you get points. I make people test this, because it actually doesn't work. It doesn't count things correctly. And for some people, it takes hours before they realize, because it's so much fun to play that they don't even notice that they can never get the full score. Other people are immediately ready to say, like, no, if I don't get the full score, it must be that this is broken, and then they start looking for evidence. So I had some of my colleagues play this in a group, and in the end of it, like always when you're trying to learn, I asked them, what did they learn? They learned to be intentional. This is what testing is about. Figuring out what you're trying to do, what information you're trying to get out of it. So being intentional. Being intentional about what you're trying to understand, not being all over the place, but going with a purpose. They also learned that wanting to do something intentionally isn't enough. You also have to give luck a chance. Serendipity is this idea that you didn't mean something to happen, but since you were doing things and you were paying attention, you noticed something of relevance. Then understanding how things could work is a foundation. So if you don't know that it could work, it doesn't make sense to report that it doesn't work with a complex scenario. It might not work even in the basic scenario, and it might be that the problem is in you. So you might not know that. If things are hard, never, ever just do the hard work. You have developers in your teams. Go and talk to them. Tell them how life is hard, and ask them to change things so that it doesn't have to be so hard. So trying to get same 5 letters out of Boggle cubes, it's going to be a half a day minimum task, and getting that to repeat, almost impossible. But if you have that little secret button that would always give you the same ones, it would give you a completely different kind of focus on testing that. And we have similar things in our projects. You also have much more tools than you believe you would have. So you just need to be open to finding them. With Boggle cubes, vocabulary would be nice, especially if you don't speak Finnish. And if you do speak Finnish, it's still a handy tool, because what it gives you is automation, when you can put the tool and whatever you were doing together and seeing things in combination. So if you don't have a tool that you feel like you could need, put 2 tools together, you can build something better. So we ended up building a little bit of automation where the permutations comparing to the vocabulary were easier to find and easier to identify. And finally, we found problems. The calculation didn't work correctly, but it was so much fun that nobody would take it back to the store. So it wasn't really a quality problem. It was, for us at least, adding quality rather than removing it. So quality is about wanting to move forward on that. So my last words. It's really about giving luck a chance and staying with it. So I leave you with 2 quotes. Arnold Palmer is a golfer. The more he practices, the luckier he gets. I feel very much the same way about the way we do in projects. And Albert Einstein, I don't maybe need to even introduce him. He says that he's not that smart, but he stays with the problems longer. 25 years for me is just a start. I look forward to the next 25 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Maaret, for that. And we have time for a couple of questions. So, anyone? We have one over here.
Hello, and thank you for your speech. My name is Vasilis, and you said about mob programming, and it's a concept that I heard a lot these days. That is a very nice tool about teaching yourself different skills. Mm-hmm. I have an issue when I'm in a group that know more things from me, or less. They're supposed to know less things than me. Sometimes I feel shame when asking these skills. How do you solve this problem?
So when the group has different level of skills, yes. How do I solve it? So I'm going to give an example that I use with mobbing a lot. There was a girl, 8 years old girl, who joined a mob programming session in one of the conferences. It's kind of clear that she had less skills than the adult programmers in that group. She thought it was a fun game to play, and when she wasn't on the keyboard, she was telling tic-tac-toe how to play it on a higher level of abstractions, having the more skilled people translating that into code. And when she was at the keyboard, the other programmers would tell her exactly what letters to type. So maybe the practice of patience and the trust that even the 80-year-olds can pick up these skills in that group. I think any one of us can. Yeah.
Maybe I can become a lot clearer. How do you elevate the shame that people feel when asking things in a group that have different skill levels and when they're supposed to know things or they do not?
So people, the problem of people being afraid that they look foolish. Usually that's around talking about it, talking about how do you feel, rewarding and actively acknowledging good questions that people might think otherwise were making them feel like they were seen in a negative light. So over time, building an environment where you encourage people to come with their whole selves. So usually retrospectives is the key. Having those very openly and actively, and giving a chance of learning more. Hi.
Great, and we have time for one more question. No? Okay, thank you very much, Maaret.
I'm still going to be around for a while, so if you want to talk about stuff, then, come and talk to me.
Thank you, big round of applause.